This is day 4. I need you to understand that before anything else. This is day 4. I have 3 days left. Maybe less, maybe a little more, but the pattern don't stretch past 7. It never has. Not once in 70 years. 3 nights ago, I stepped out onto my back porch to let the dog in. It was 11:15, cold for October, even by Kentucky standards. That kind of cold that don't just sit on your skin, but pushes through it, gets into the marrow. The porch light was out. Bulb blew a week ago, and I hadn't gotten around to replacing it. So the only light was what came through the kitchen window behind me, this thin yellow rectangle falling across the boards and dying about 3 feet from the steps. I whistled for Jeb, my blue tick, and he didn't come. That alone should have told me. Jeb always comes, 12 years old and half deaf, but he hears that whistle like it's the voice of God himself. I've had that dog since Della passed. He's my only company in this house, the only breathing thing that shares these rooms with me. And in 12 years, he has never once failed to come when I whistle. I whistled again. Nothing. Just the creak at the bottom of the hollow, making its constant water over rock sound, and the wind moving through the trees up on the slope, and somewhere far off, a screech owl calling out into the dark. Then I looked up at the ridge, and there it was, standing on the tree line, maybe 300 yards up the slope, right where the old-growth timber starts and the logging roads give out, still as a fence post, tall, Lord, so tall, like someone had taken a man and stretched him out on a rack until the proportions went wrong, just standing there against the sky, with its arms at its sides and its head tilted down toward my house, like it was reading something written on my roof. The moon was about 3/4 full, sitting low behind the eastern ridge, throwing just enough light that the tree line was visible as a jagged black edge against a slightly less black sky. And that figure, that shape I have known since I was 7 years old, stood out against it the way a nail sticks out of a floorboard. Wrong, unmistakable, impossible to unsee once you've seen it. I didn't scream. I didn't run inside. I'm 79 years old, and I have seen that thing more times than any man alive. I just stood there on my porch in my house shoes and my undershirt, my breath making little clouds in the cold, and I said out loud, to no one, to the dark, to that thing on the ridge. I said, "So it's time again." It didn't move. It never moves when you're watching it. That's one of the things I've learned over 7 decades. The creature does not perform. It does not react. It stands. It watches. And when it's done watching, it leaves, but always on its own terms. Never because you shouted at it. Never because you shot at it. Never because you begged. Jeb came slinking around the corner of the house about 10 minutes later, belly low to the ground, whimpering like a puppy. His tail was tucked so tight against his belly, it might as well not have existed. I picked him up, 70 pounds of trembling hound, and carried him inside. He wouldn't go back outside for 2 days, wouldn't eat for 1. I walked inside, sat down at my kitchen table, and opened the journal. The one I've been keeping since 1996. 28 years of dates, names, sightings, and deaths. Every entry verified, every correlation confirmed. The pages are yellowed now, the early entries fading. Some of the ink has bled through to the other side, but every word is still legible. Every name is still there. I turned to the next blank page and wrote the date, the time, and 2 words. It's back. Then I picked up this recorder, because I'm done with the journal. The journal was for me, for my own sanity, so I could see the pattern laid out in ink and know I wasn't losing my mind. But a journal don't help nobody when you're dead. And I believe with every tired bone in this used up body that in 3 days I will be dead. Not because the creature kills. I need to be clear about that right from the start. I have spent a lifetime misunderstanding what that thing does, and I will not go into the ground carrying that misunderstanding with me. But someone in Denton Hollow will die within 7 days of a sighting. That is fact. That is as reliable as gravity, as certain as the sun coming up over Cranks Creek in the morning. 70 years, 14 sightings I can verify, 14 deaths, 100% correlation, not 99%, not most of the time, every single time, without fail, without exception, without mercy. And I am the last person alive who knows the full accounting. So sit down. Listen, I ain't got the luxury of telling this slow. I was born in Denton Hollow in 1945. If you ain't from Eastern Kentucky, you probably can't picture what a place like this is. It ain't a town, not really. It's more like a scar in the landscape where people decided to live anyway. One road comes in from the county highway, follows Denton Creek about 4 miles back into the mountains, and dead ends at the old Hargrove mine portal. On either side of that road, the hills go up so steep you could spit off your front porch and hit your neighbor's roof downhill. 200 people lived there when I was a boy, maybe 80 now, and half of those are too old or too poor to leave. The forest starts about 100 feet above the highest house and don't stop for miles. Hardwood, oak, hickory, poplar, beech, so thick and so old that in summer the canopy closes up like a ceiling and the ground underneath stays dark at noon. You go up past the tree line on any of those ridges, and you can see nothing but mountains and timber in every direction, all the way to Virginia. No cell towers, no power lines, no roads. Just ridge after ridge after ridge, folding into each other like the earth was crumpled up and thrown in a corner and nobody ever bothered to smooth it out. I tell you this so you understand. The hollow is a pocket, a fold in the world. Things can exist up in those mountains for a very long time without anyone outside ever knowing. And things have. Lord, things have. My first memory of the creature is from September of 1954. I was 7 years old. My brother, Alton, was 12. A big kid for his age, strong the way boys got strong in coal country, carrying buckets and splitting wood before school. Alton was the kind of brother who'd carry you on his back through the creek when the water was high and never complain about it. He taught me to fish. He taught me to whittle. He taught me which mushrooms you could eat and which ones would kill you. He was my whole world, and I followed him around like his shadow had a shadow. The night of September 14th, I woke up because the dogs were going crazy. We had 3 hounds penned up beside the house, and they were howling. Not barking, not baying like they'd treed something, but howling. Long, mournful, continuous howling, like they were grieving something that hadn't happened yet. My daddy always said dogs could hear things people couldn't. I used to think he meant sounds. Now I think he meant something else entirely. I went to the window. My bedroom faced the ridge on the east side of the hollow, and the moon was nearly full that night, so the tree line was visible. A dark, jagged edge against a blue-black sky, and standing right at the edge of the trees, maybe 400 yards up, was a figure. At 7 years old, I didn't have the framework to understand what I was looking at. My first thought was that it was a bear standing on its hind legs, but it was too narrow, too tall, Bears are broad, thick in the chest and the shoulders. This thing was narrow and long, like a person who'd been starving for months, but kept growing taller anyway. Its arms hung past where they should have hung. Its head looked too small for its body, or maybe its body was just too big for its head. The proportions were wrong in a way that made my stomach turn, the way a picture hung crooked on a wall can make you nauseous if you look at it long enough. It didn't move. That's what I remember most. Everything else in the world was moving. The trees were swaying, the dogs were thrashing against their pen, the clouds were sliding across the moon. But that figure stood absolutely perfectly still, like it had been planted there, like it was part of the ridge itself and had simply decided to stand up. I watched it for what felt like an hour, but was probably 5 minutes. My hands were on the windowsill and they were shaking, and my breath was fogging the glass, so I had to keep wiping it with my pajama sleeve. Then a cloud covered the moon, and when the light came back, the figure was gone. Just trees, just sky, just the ridge, the same ridge I'd looked at every day of my 7 years, looking back at me with nothing on it. I told myself I'd imagined it. I went back to bed. I pulled the covers over my head, and I listened to the dogs howl until they finally stopped, sometime around 3 in the morning, as sudden as if someone had thrown a switch. The next afternoon, September 15th, Alton went down to the deep pool in Denton Creek, where the older boys liked to swim. The current had been strong from the rains that week, but Alton was a good swimmer, the best in the hollow. I wanted to go with him, but my mother said no. The water was too high for little ones. I remember standing on the porch watching him walk down the road toward the creek, his towel over his shoulder, his feet bare on the gravel. He turned around once and waved at me. I waved back. They found him face down in the shallows about 2 hours later. The doctor in town said he'd hit his head on a submerged rock. A freak accident, the kind of thing that just happens sometimes. My mother never recovered from it. She went somewhere inside herself after Alton's funeral and never fully came back. My father stopped speaking for almost a year. He'd sit at the dinner table and move food around his plate and stare at Alton's empty chair. And the only sound in the house was the clock ticking, and my mother crying in the other room, and me, 7 years old, eating my supper alone in a house full of ghosts. And I never told anyone what I'd seen on the ridge the night before. Because what was there to tell? I was 7. I'd seen a shadow, a shape, probably a tree that looked wrong in the moonlight. That's what I told myself for the next 13 years. 13 years is a long time to not see something, long enough to convince yourself it never happened. Long enough for the memory to fade from a vivid image to a dim impression, to a half-remembered feeling that might have been a dream. By 1967, I was 20 years old, working my first year as a safety inspector trainee in the Hargrove mine. The mine was the whole economy of Denton Hollow. Every man either worked in it or worked because of it. The tipple rose above the head of the hollow like a dark cathedral, and the sound of the conveyor belts was the heartbeat of the place, running 12 hours a day, 6 days a week. My job was to check support timbers, ventilation readings, and gas levels. I took it serious. After what happened to Alton, the idea that you could prevent death, that you could see danger before it arrived and stop it, that idea had a hold on me. Every timber I checked, every gas reading I took, I was fighting something. Not the mine, something older, something that had taken my brother and left me behind to wonder why. The evening of March 3rd, 1967, I was walking home from the mine along the creek road when I heard Bill Coombs hollering from his front porch. Bill was a hard man, not given to excitement. The kind of fellow who'd watch his own barn burn down and just light a cigarette and start calculating lumber costs. He was standing on his porch, pointing up at the east ridge with one hand and holding his rifle in the other, and he was shouting for his wife to come look. I looked where he was pointing. My whole body went cold. Not scared cold, recognition cold. The kind of cold that comes when something you buried 13 years ago claws its way back up to the surface and stands in front of you covered in dirt and says, "You remember me." It was the same figure, same ridge, same posture. Arms hanging low, head tilted slightly forward, body impossibly tall and narrow against the tree line, standing as still as if it had been carved from the mountain itself. 13 years hadn't changed it, not its shape, not its stance, not the wrongness of its proportions. It was exactly what I'd seen from my bedroom window as a 7-year-old boy, and seeing it again as a 20-year-old man was like stepping backward through time into a night I'd spent my whole life trying to forget. But this time, it wasn't just me and the moonlight. Bill Coombs saw it. His wife, Rena, saw it. And down the road, 2 other families came out of their houses because of Bill's shouting, and they saw it too. 6 adults and 3 children, all staring up at the same impossible thing on the ridge. Bill fired his rifle at it. 3 shots. The sound cracked off the hollow walls like thunder, echoing back and forth until it sounded like a whole war. The figure didn't flinch, didn't move, didn't react at all. Bill might as well have been throwing pebbles at the moon. I watched those muzzle flashes light up the hillside. 3 brief orange explosions. And the creature stood through all of them the way a mountain stands through a rainstorm, unmoved, unimpressed, unchanged. After the 3rd shot, the figure turned, slowly with a strange mechanical smoothness, like a door swinging on a hinge, and walked into the trees. Not fast, not running. Just a slow, deliberate walk, each step covering a distance that shouldn't have been possible for something moving that slowly. Within 4 or 5 strides, it was gone, swallowed by the forest like it had never been there. Nobody slept that night. By morning, the whole hollow was talking about it. Half the people said Bigfoot. They'd heard the stories from other parts of the mountains, the old tales that predated the English-speaking settlers by centuries. The Cherokee and Shawnee had names for things in these woods that the coal companies never bothered to learn. The other half said it was a bear, a trick of the light, mass hysteria. People believe what they need to believe to sleep at night. I understand that. I envy it. 6 days later, on March 9th, the foreman of the day shift, a man named Curtis Blevins, 41 years old, father of 4, was killed when a support timber gave way in Section 7 and brought down 14 tons of ceiling rock. I had inspected that section 2 days prior. The timbers were sound. The rock showed no signs of fracturing. The geological survey said that section was stable for another 5 years at minimum. There was no reason for that collapse. None. It just happened. The mountain reached down and took a man the way you'd pluck a berry off a bush. Casually, without effort, without malice. Curtis Blevins, who coached Little League and sang bass in the church choir and had a laugh that could shake the walls, was just gone. 14 tons of rock and 100% certainty that it shouldn't have fallen. I sat in my truck after the funeral and shook for an hour because I remembered. September 1954, a figure on the ridge, and then Alton, dead in the creek the next day. March 1967, the same figure, Curtis Blevins, dead in the mine 6 days later. 2 sightings, 2 deaths, both within 7 days. I didn't say anything to anyone. What could I say? That a monster on the ridge was killing people, that I'd seen it before my brother died, and now it had come back. They'd have put me in Eastern State. Or worse, they'd have believed me, and then what? What do you do with knowledge like that? How do you live in a place when you know something is watching from above, and every time it shows itself, someone you love is going to die? But I started paying attention. God help me, I started paying attention. The next 11 years were quiet, no sightings, no unexplained deaths. Denton Hollow went on the way, small towns go on, slowly, grudgingly, losing a little more of itself every year as the young people left and the mine automation took away jobs, and the world outside forgot places like ours existed. I married a woman named Della Sizemore in 1972. Della was from 2 hollows over, a schoolteacher's daughter with a laugh that could fill a room and a stubbornness that could empty one. She had dark hair and green eyes and a way of looking at you when you were talking nonsense that made you stop mid-sentence and reconsider your whole life. She was the best thing that ever happened to me, and every day we had together was a day I didn't deserve. In October of 1978, a man named Randall Price was hunting deer on the upper slopes of the East Ridge. Randall was an experienced hunter, 45 years old, steady hands, knew those mountains better than his own kitchen. He'd been hunting those ridges since he was a boy. He could read deer sign the way a preacher reads scripture, fluently, instinctively, without conscious effort. There wasn't a hollow or a draw or a game trail within 10 miles that Randall hadn't walked 100 times. He came back to the hollow that evening, white as chalk, hands shaking so bad he couldn't light his cigarette. I was on my porch when he walked past, and I knew before he said a word. The look on his face was one I recognized. It was the look of a man whose understanding of the world had just been broken in half and rearranged. He'd been sitting in his tree stand about an hour before dusk when he heard something moving through the brush below him. Heavy, slow, deliberate footsteps crunching through the leaf litter with a rhythm that was almost mechanical. Not the irregular browsing pace of a deer, not the shuffle of a bear, but a measured, purposeful cadence that sounded like it belonged to something that knew exactly where it was going. He looked down, expecting a bear. What he saw, he said, was something that walked like a man but wasn't a man. 8 feet tall at minimum, covered in dark, matted fur that had patches of gray in it. Not the gray of age, he said, but the gray of ash, like it had walked through a fire. The fur was uneven, thick in some places and thin in others, and beneath the thin patches, Randall said the skin was dark, almost black, and it had a sheen to it like wet leather. It moved directly beneath his tree stand, and he said the smell was like nothing he'd ever encountered. Not rot, not musk, but something metallic and old, like blood on rust. Like something that had been bleeding for a very long time. It stopped beneath his stand. It didn't look up. It just stood there, breathing. Slow, deep breaths that he could feel vibrating through the tree trunk, through the boards of his stand, through the soles of his boots, and up into his legs. The tree itself seemed to be breathing with the creature, expanding and contracting in a rhythm that wasn't wind and wasn't natural and wasn't anything Randall had ever felt in 45 years of sitting in trees. Randall said he held his rifle, aimed at the top of its head for a full 3 minutes, finger on the trigger, and could not make himself shoot. Not because of fear, he said, because of something else. Something he couldn't name, a feeling that pulling that trigger would be the worst thing he ever did. Not the most dangerous, the worst. Like shooting it would violate something fundamental about the order of the world. Like the creature wasn't just an animal in the wrong place, but a part of the landscape itself. And killing it would be like killing the mountain. It moved on after those 3 minutes, walked away into the trees with that same slow, impossible gait, each stride covering 8 or 10 feet without any apparent increase in speed. It just moved differently than anything Randall had ever seen, as if the distance between 2 points was shorter for it than it was for everything else. 5 days later, Randall's wife, Deanna, collapsed in their kitchen from a brain aneurysm. She was dead before the ambulance could make it up the hollow road. She was 38 years old and had never had a health problem in her life. Her last physical had been clean. Her blood pressure was normal. Her family had no history of stroke or aneurysm. She'd been making supper, pork chops and applesauce, Randall said, because he remembered the smell of the applesauce cooking on the stove. And she just fell, like God reached down and turned her off. 3 sightings, 3 deaths, all within 7 days. That's when the whispers started. Not loud. People in hollows don't talk loud about things that scare them. But in kitchens and on porches and in the back pews of the Free Will Baptist Church, people started connecting dots. Old Bill Combs, who'd shot at the thing in '67, started telling anyone who'd listen that the creature was a death sign, a harbinger, that when it showed itself, it was marking someone. The preacher said it was the devil's work. The old women said it was a curse on the hollow, something to do with the mine, with what had been taken out of that mountain. The young people said it was nonsense. I said nothing. I just kept my eyes on the ridge. 1989 is the year that broke something in me. It was August, hot and thick the way August gets in the mountains, the air so heavy with moisture that you're wet the moment you step outside. Della and I had been married 17 years by then. No children. The Lord didn't see fit to give us any. And we'd made our peace with that. Or Della had made her peace with it. And I'd followed her lead, the way I followed her lead on most things. We had each other, and that was enough. More than enough. It was everything. Della was hanging laundry on the line behind our house. It was late afternoon, maybe 5:30, still full daylight. I was inside washing dishes, and I heard her call my name. Not a scream, just my name, spoken once, in a tone I'd never heard from her before. Flat, controlled, like she was working very hard to keep her voice level. Like the voice itself was a door she was holding shut against something pushing from the other side. I went to the back door. Della was standing by the clothesline, a wet bedsheet still in her hands, staring up at the ridge. I didn't have to ask what she was looking at. It was there, daylight this time. The first time anyone had reported seeing it before dark. It was standing maybe 200 yards up the slope, partially behind a massive oak, and in the direct light of the afternoon sun, I could see details I'd never seen before. The fur was dark brown, almost black, but patchy, not like an animal shedding its coat, but like something that was wearing its skin unevenly, as though the body underneath didn't quite fit right, as though the outside had been built for something a slightly different shape, and the creature was making do. The arms were grotesquely long, hanging to below the knees, and the hands, I could see the hands, were enormous, with fingers that seemed to have too many joints. Not 5 joints like a human hand, but 6, maybe 7, giving the fingers a segmented, insectile quality that was somehow worse than the size. The face was in shadow despite the daylight, set deep beneath a heavy brow ridge that protruded like a shelf of bone, and I couldn't make out the eyes. But I knew they were there. I could feel them the way you feel heat from a stove before you touch it. They were looking at Della. I pulled her inside. She didn't resist, didn't speak, didn't cry. She just let me lead her into the house. And when I locked the door behind us, she sat down at the kitchen table and said very quietly, "It looked sad, Earl. That's the thing I can't get out of my head. It looked so sad. I wanted to leave. I wanted to throw everything we owned in the truck and drive out of that hollow and never come back. But Della wouldn't go. She said running wouldn't change anything. She said if the thing on the ridge meant death, then death would find you whether you were in Denton Hollow or Detroit." She said it with such calm certainty that I almost believed her. Almost. But I've been married to fear longer than I was ever married to Della, and fear don't listen to reason. I have never been more afraid in my life than I was during the 7 days that followed. I didn't sleep. I barely ate, just enough to keep from falling over. I followed Della from room to room like a child following his mother, and she let me without comment, without complaint, this patient gentleness about her that made me want to cry, because it meant she was comforting me when she was the one who'd seen the thing up close. She was the one it had looked at. And here she was, making me coffee and telling me to sit down and take a breath. I checked the locks every hour. I checked the propane lines, the electrical wiring, the water heater, anything that could malfunction, anything that could go wrong. I inspected the porch for loose boards. I tested the smoke detectors. I even got under the house with a flashlight and checked the foundation supports, as if 100-year-old creature on a ridge was going to kill my wife through a cracked cinder block. I made her stay inside. I called off work. I sat on the porch with my deer rifle and watched that ridge until my eyes burned. Day 3, nothing. Day 4, nothing. Day 5, nothing. I started to let myself breathe, started to think maybe this time was different. Maybe Della was right about it not being automatic, not being guaranteed. Maybe you could see the thing and live. Maybe the pattern had a crack in it. Day 6, nothing. I slept for 2 hours that night, the first real sleep in nearly a week, and I dreamed about Alton. He was standing in the creek, water up to his knees, and he was waving at me the way he'd waved that last afternoon, and I was waving back, and neither one of us could stop waving, and I woke up with tears on my face and the taste of creek water in my mouth. Day 7. I was sitting at the kitchen table at 6 in the morning, running on coffee and adrenaline, when I heard the sirens. Our neighbor, Harold Eversole, had been killed in a logging accident on the county road. A load of timber had shifted on a flatbed truck and come loose, and one of the logs had gone through the cab of Harold's pickup like a javelin. He'd been on his way to his daughter's house in Pineville. He was 52 years old. He had a bad knee and a good laugh, and he'd helped me put a new roof on my shed the summer before and wouldn't take a dime for it. Harold Eversole, not Della. The relief I felt is the most shameful thing I have ever experienced. A man I'd known my whole life was dead, and my very first thought, was thank God it wasn't her. I went into the bathroom and vomited, and then I sat on the floor and cried, and I didn't know if I was crying for Harold or for myself or for this whole cursed hollow that couldn't seem to stop feeding its people to whatever lived on that ridge. 4 sightings, 4 deaths, 7 days or less. Della never talked about what she saw, not once, not for the rest of her life. I tried to bring it up a few times over the years, and each time she'd just look at me with those green eyes and shake her head once, gently, and change the subject. Whatever she'd seen in that creature's face, that sadness she'd described, she carried it privately, the way she carried most things. I need to stop for a minute. My hands are shaking, and it ain't from the cold. Day 4. It's day 4, and I'm sitting here talking into this recorder in a house that feels smaller than it used to, and the ridge outside my window looks taller than it used to, and the trees up there are moving in a wind I can't feel down here. Where was I? 1996. A boy named Tyler Kraft, 16 years old, got a hold of one of them disposable cameras and snapped a photo of the creature from his bedroom window. It was nighttime, and the flash didn't carry far enough to illuminate much. What you got was a vaguely tall, vaguely humanoid blur against the dark trees. The kind of image that proves everything to the person who took it and nothing to anyone else. Tyler showed it to everybody in the hollow. Half the people squinted at it and said they could see something. The other half said it was a tree trunk. 4 days later, Tyler's grandmother, Agnes Kraft, 81 years old, sharp as a tack, still canned her own green beans every summer, went to sleep on a Tuesday night and didn't wake up Wednesday morning. The doctor called it cardiac arrest. Natural causes. She was 81 after all. Nothing unusual about an 81-year-old dying in her sleep. Nothing unusual at all. But I knew. That's when I started the journal. I couldn't carry it all in my head anymore. The dates, the details, the names of the dead. I bought a composition notebook from the dollar store in Harlan, and I wrote down everything I could remember, going back to 1954. Dates, locations, who saw the creature, where they saw it, who died, and how many days after the sighting. Then I kept it current. I kept that journal in the drawer of my nightstand, and every few months I'd take it out and read through it, and every time I did, the pattern stared back at me, plain as day. Sighting, death, 7 days or less. No exceptions, no survivors who should have been victims, no victims who shouldn't have been. The journal didn't make me feel better. It made me feel like a man who'd figured out the combination to a safe that held nothing inside but a scream. By 2003, I'd retired from the mine. Della and I were living on pension and Social Security, growing tomatoes in the backyard, going to church on Sundays, doing the things that old people in hollows do when the world has moved on without them. The hollow had shrunk to maybe 120 people. Half the houses were empty. The mine had closed in '98, and the young families had scattered to Lexington, Louisville, Cincinnati. Anywhere there was work, but new people came sometimes. That year, a family named Draper moved into the old Combs house, Bill and Rena's place, empty since Bill died in 2001. Marcus and Sarah Draper, both in their 30s, with 3 kids, 2 girls and a boy. Marcus had gotten a job at the gas company doing pipeline maintenance, and the Combs house was cheap. They were good people, friendly, the kind of young family that makes an old hollow feel less like a graveyard and more like a place that might have a future. I struggled with what to do. Part of me said, tell them, warn them, explain the pattern, show them the journal, make them understand what lived on that ridge. Another part of me, the coward's part, and I won't pretend otherwise, said keep your mouth shut. Because how do you tell a young family with 3 children that the town they just moved to has a death sentence attached to it? How do you explain that a creature appears on the ridge and someone dies and there's nothing anyone can do about it? You can't. You sound insane. You sound like every crazy old man in every horror movie who warns the young people and gets ignored. I told them anyway. I went over with a jar of Della's pickled beets as a welcome gift, and after the pleasantries, I sat at their kitchen table and laid it out. All of it. 1954, 1967, 1978, 1989, 1996. The journal, the pattern. They smiled at me, the way you smile at an old person who's telling you about the ghost in their attic. Polite, patient, absolutely unconvinced. Marcus said he appreciated me looking out for them, but he didn't put stock in that kind of thing. Sarah offered me more coffee. The oldest girl, who was maybe 10, looked at me with big eyes and asked if the Bigfoot was friendly. I didn't know what to say to that. I still don't. I went home and told Della I'd done what I could. She said I had. She put her hand on mine and held it for a long time, and neither of us said anything else about it. 14 months later, in November 2003, Marcus Draper saw the creature. He was bringing groceries in from the car at dusk and looked up, and there it was, right on the tree line, close enough this time that he could make out the shape clearly. He told Sarah it was a bear. He told himself it was a bear. He did not come to my house with questions, and he did not mention my warning. 6 days later, on a Sunday night, a windstorm came through the hollow. Not unusual for November. The mountains funnel wind down through the hollows and amplify it, so a moderate storm outside can sound like the end of the world inside. But one of the old oaks above the Draper house, a tree that must have been 200 years old, rooted deep in that mountainside through wars and floods and every storm God ever threw at it. That tree came down in a gust that the Weather Service later clocked at 43 miles per hour. 43 miles per hour. That tree had survived winds 3 times that strong for 2 centuries. It had stood through the blizzard of 78 and the ice storm of 94 and hurricane remnants that tore roofs off houses all down the hollow. And it chose that night, that gust, that moment to fall. It came down on the back corner of the house, on the boy's bedroom. Thomas Draper, 6 years old. Marcus Draper found me the next morning. He came to my porch before the sun was up, still covered in drywall dust and splinters, his eyes red and empty, and he said one sentence, "You tried to tell me." I have never felt more useless in my life. Being right don't mean a damn thing when a child is dead. All my journal entries, all my correlations, all my careful record keeping, what was any of it worth? It didn't stop anything. It didn't change anything. It just meant I was the one person who knew it was coming and couldn't do a thing about it. The Drapers left the hollow within a month. I don't know where they went. I hope they went far. I hope they went somewhere flat, somewhere with no ridges and no tree lines and no shadows tall enough to hide what lives in this place. Della passed in 2011. Lung cancer. Nothing to do with the creature, just the regular grinding cruelty that life visits on people in coal country, where the air's been bad and the water's been bad and the doctors are an hour away. I held her hand in the hospice in Harlan, and she looked at me near the end and said, "Don't you stay in that hollow, Earl. Don't you let that place eat you too." I stayed. I couldn't leave. I know how that sounds. I know it sounds like stubbornness or stupidity or some twisted form of loyalty to a place that don't deserve it. But it was none of those things. It was responsibility. I was the record keeper. I was the only one who had seen the pattern from the beginning. From Alton in '54 to Thomas Draper in 2003. And if I left, if I took my journal and went to live in some apartment in Lexington, then there'd be nobody to track it. Nobody to sound the alarm. Nobody to at least try. And maybe, if I watched long enough, if I paid close enough attention, I'd figure out the why. Not just the what, not just the when, but the reason. Why the hollow? Why the deaths? Why that creature stood on that ridge and stared down at us with eyes that my wife said looked sad. 2015 is the year I almost quit. Almost packed the truck. Almost drove away and let Denton Hollow rot. There'd been 9 years without a sighting. 9 years. The longest gap in the entire history of the pattern. Some of the old-timers who remembered the creature had died of natural causes. Time doing what time does, taking people the ordinary way, no harbinger required. The younger folks who'd heard the stories treated them like folklore. Campfire tales, hollow legends, the kind of thing you told your kids to keep them from wandering into the woods after dark. I'd started to wonder if it was over, if the creature had moved on or died, or simply decided that 70 years of death was enough. I still checked the ridge every night from my back porch, but it had become habit, not vigilance, like locking your door in a town where nothing's ever been stolen. October 19th, 2015. 3 people in the hollow saw the creature on the same night. Randy Hoskins, a 60-year-old retired electrician, saw it from his front porch at 10:15 p.m. Brenda Sloan, a 53-year-old home health aide, saw it from her bedroom window at approximately the same time, 10 to 10:30. And a 12-year-old boy named Devon Wilder saw it from the road while walking his dog. 3 witnesses, same night. 3 different locations in the hollow, as if the creature had walked the entire length of the ridge from one end to the other, making sure it was seen, making sure the message was received. Not one appearance, but 3. Not one warning, but a whole sentence spelled out in silhouette against the tree line. 3 deaths followed. Randy Hoskins died of a heart attack on day 2. Brenda Sloan was killed in a single car accident on the county road on day 5. Lost control on a curve she'd driven 10,000 times. And Devon Wilder's grandfather, not Devon himself, his grandfather, a 78-year-old Korean War veteran named Pete Wilder, fell down the stairs in his own home on day 6 and broke his neck. 3 sightings, 3 deaths, all within 7 days. I sat with my journal that week, and my hands shook so bad I could barely write. The pattern wasn't just holding. It was escalating. Multiple appearances, multiple deaths. As if whatever engine drove this thing was speeding up, demanding more. As if the hollow's dwindling population meant the creature had to appear to more people at once, just to fulfill whatever purpose drove it to that ridge. I called my cousin in Lexington and told him I was thinking of selling the house. He said he'd help me find a place. I went to bed that night fully intending to leave. I woke up the next morning, looked out the window at the ridge, and I stayed. God forgive me, I stayed. The years between 2015 and now have been quiet. No sightings. The hollow has dwindled to maybe 80 people, most of us old, most of us tired. The young ones who are left work service jobs in Harlan or Cumberland and come home to sleep in houses their grandparents built. The hollow is dying the way a lot of Appalachia is dying, not all at once, not with any drama, just a slow fade, like a coal fire burning down to ash. I've spent those years thinking, 9 years of thinking, which is too much thinking for any man. But when you're old and alone, and the only company you keep is a journal full of the dead, thinking is what you do. Here's what I've come to believe. And I know this sounds crazy. I know it sounds like the rambling of a lonely old man who's been staring at a ridge too long. But I've earned the right to say it, and you've listened this far, so hear me out. That creature is not killing anyone. I've gone back through every death, every single one. And there is no mechanism, no claw marks, no bite wounds, no sign of attack or physical contact of any kind. Alton drowned. Curtis Blevins was crushed in a mine collapse. Deanna Price had an aneurysm. Harold Eversole was hit by a loose log. Agnes Kraft died in her sleep. Thomas Draper was killed by a falling tree. Randy Hoskins had a heart attack. Brenda Sloan crashed her car. Pete Wilder fell down his stairs. All of these deaths have mundane explanations, every single one. If you took any of them in isolation, you'd never suspect anything supernatural. An accident, a medical event, bad luck. The kind of thing that happens in small towns every day. But they happen within 7 days of a sighting. Every time. 100%. And that cannot be coincidence, not over 70 years, not with 14 verified instances. So what is it? I believe the creature is a harbinger, not a cause. A harbinger. It doesn't bring death. It sees death coming, the way some animals can sense an earthquake before the ground shakes. It comes down to the ridge not to hunt, but to watch, to stand witness, maybe to grieve. Della said it looked sad. Randall Price said he couldn't shoot it, not because of fear, but because of something else, something he couldn't name. Devin Wilder, the 12-year-old boy, told me years later that when he saw the creature on the road, he didn't feel scared. He felt sorry for it. Sorry for the 8-foot-tall thing with the ash-gray fur and the arms that hung past its knees. I think it's been here as long as the hollow has. Maybe longer. I think it lives up in those mountains, in the deep parts, the parts where no logging road has ever gone, where the trees are so old they remember the Ice Age. And it comes down when it senses that death is near. I think it's been doing this for centuries, maybe longer, and we are not the first people it's watched die. The Cherokee had a name for something like this. I spent years trying to find it. Went to the library in Harlan, talked to a professor at the community college, even drove up to Berea once to talk to a folklorist. The closest I ever found was a reference to certain spirits that walked the ridgelines before tragedy struck. Not evil spirits, not demons, but watchers, witnesses, beings that existed at the boundary between the living world and whatever comes after, and whose presence meant the boundary was thin. That's what I believe the creature is, a being that stands at the edge. And 3 nights ago, it came to stand at the edge for me. I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, Earl, you don't know it's for you. The pattern says, someone dies. Not any specific someone. It could be anybody in the hollow. You're right. It could be. There are 80-some people living here, and any one of them could be the one. But listen to me. I am 79 years old. I have congestive heart failure. My doctor in Harlan has been telling me for 3 years that any day could be my last. And I've been ignoring him for 3 years because I had work to do. I had the journal to keep. I had the ridge to watch. But also, and this is the part that's hard to explain, when I saw the creature 3 nights ago, it was looking at me. Not at the hollow, not at the ridge, at me. I could feel its attention the way you feel the sun on your face. Direct, specific, unmistakable. In 70 years, through every sighting, I have never felt that before. It was always just there, a presence on the ridge, watchful but general, like a lighthouse beam sweeping the water. But 3 nights ago, the beam stopped. It pointed at me, and it held. It knows me. It has watched me watching it for 7 decades, and now it's come to watch me back. I'm not afraid. I want to be clear about that. I have spent my whole life being afraid of that ridge and what stands on it, and somewhere in the last few years, the fear burned down to nothing, and what was left underneath was something quieter. Acceptance, maybe, or understanding. I have watched this creature herald the deaths of people I loved, my brother, my neighbors, a 6-year-old boy. And I have raged against it, and I have wept over it, and I have studied it, and I have tried to warn people about it. And none of it changed anything. The creature comes. Someone dies. The hollow goes on. That's the pattern. That's the only pattern. And maybe the reason I could never figure out the why is because there is no why. Death doesn't need a reason. It just needs a witness. It's getting dark now. Day 4, almost day 5. Jeb is lying at my feet, and he hasn't lifted his head in hours. Dogs know. They always know. I want to say a few more things before I'm done. First, the journal is in the top drawer of my nightstand. It's a black composition notebook, the kind kids use in school. It has every sighting, every death, every detail I could verify, going back 70 years. If I die, when I die, I want someone to take that journal and keep it, continue it, because the creature is not going to stop. It was here before the mine, before the road, before the first house was built in this hollow, and it will be here after the last one falls down. Someone needs to keep the record. Second, if you live in Denton Hollow or a place like it, a pocket, a fold, a place where the mountains close in and the forest goes deep and the rest of the world feels very far away, pay attention to the ridgeline. Not with fear, with respect. There are things in these mountains that are older than us and bigger than us and operating on a timeline we can't comprehend. They are not malicious. They are not evil. But they are present, and their presence means something. Third, I miss Della. I miss her every single day in a way that doesn't get smaller with time, but just changes shape, like water finding new cracks in a rock. If there's anything after this, and I have spent 79 years unable to decide if there is or isn't, I would like to see her again. I would like to sit on a porch with her somewhere where there are no ridges and no shadows and no creatures standing in the tree line. And I would like to hear her laugh. That laugh that could fill a room. I'd give anything to hear it one more time. That's all. It's dark now. Full dark. Jeb just raised his head. He's looking at the back door. I'm going to go out on the porch. Not because I'm brave. I'm not. I never have been. But because if that thing is on the ridge tonight, on day 4 of my last 7 days, then I want to see it one more time. I want to stand there and look up at it and know that after 70 years, the watching goes both ways. We have been each other's witnesses, that creature and me. It watched my people die, and I watched it watch them. And now it's come for the last entry in the journal. I'm going to leave this recorder on the kitchen table. If someone finds it, you'll know the story, you'll know the pattern, and maybe, you'll believe the old man from the hollow who spent his whole life looking at a ridge. The dog's whimpering now. I'm opening the door.